I'd like to call to order approved minutes of the meeting for December 13th, 2023. And this is the meeting of Wednesday, January 10th of the Norwalk Pension Board. I was not here for the minutes. You were the only one, and you're going to say they're okay.
They are okay.
Okay. And you can say second.
I'll second it.
All in favor? The two of you, aye. Pass. Thank you very much. Is there any public comment? There's no public comment. We have no pension applications. So we're going to go right to the 2023 review and work plan.
Great. So each year we like to go back and review all of the work that the pension board has done for the various plans. And you'll see on page 2 of the work plan an overview of that. In addition to the performance that we review monthly for the pension and quarterly for the OPEB and DC plans. Earlier this year, we transitioned the International Equity Growth Mandate from Artisan to Walter Scott. We did do an asset allocation study for the pension plan, which you'll see on the next page when we get to it, that we want to revisit given our 2024 capital market projections and the changes there, as well as the termination of Blackstone within global equity long short. We reviewed short duration fixed income and had a number of discussions on fixed income. And I think TCW presenting last month was a good presentation to really get their perspective on where the fixed income markets may be going in 2024. So in addition to some investment managers that presented, we also had the actuary in to review the pension valuation reports. And then within the DC plan, if you recall, we transitioned to cheaper share classes for 2 of the funds, the TCW Fixed Income Fund, as well as the Invesco Stable Value Fund. We reviewed the target date funds in depth and determined that they're certainly suitable for the Norwalk participants. We had Empower in as well to review the plan and the participants. We turn ahead to 2024. Kevin and I really put our heads together and trying to come up with the biggest priorities for the year. And as I mentioned, I think the asset allocation is one that we do want to revisit and have the pension board confirm the asset allocation, and given Blackstone's termination, where do we take that target of 4% in the portfolio? So we anticipate bringing that to the board in March for discussion, and if that takes a few meetings, then so be it. And then reviewing the investment policy statements for both the pension and OPEB. We want to do an investment manager fee analysis for both of those plans as well. It's been a few years since we've reviewed the fees for the managers. And then we've listed some of the investment manager and third-party presentations that we anticipate for the year. I think for next month, we did invite Pantheon in to provide an update on the private equity portfolios. They continue to be in runoff, but given there is still a significant chunk of the total plan within private equity, it's good to hear an update from them on how those are going. We also think it's good to have Northern Trust in as your custodian. It's been about 3 years since they've presented to the board. So probably second half of 2024, we'll try to bring them in to present. And then within the DC plans, one project that we have not done since the transition to the new record keeper is an investment structure evaluation, which is really a deep dive into what are the investment options offered to participants and confirming that the funds and the categories that you're offering still make sense if there's a desire to add or trim. So we'll take a deeper dive into that to try and confirm the lineup that's currently offered to those participants. And then most likely.
Are we gonna have Empower work with us on that as far as what participants are doing and where the new funds?
So what we can do is we'll actually get all the data from Empower.
Okay,
So you can see the utilization rates and what participants are doing, if they're using the target date funds correctly, where they're only invested in one vintage for their retirement date versus some people might invest in 10 of them.
okay,
So we'll take a look at that and how participants are utilizing the lineup, because you'll often see where there's confusion from the participant, where, you know, they're doubling up on an asset class and don't realize that it's maybe they're in the S&P 500 fund and an active large cap fund, which,
yeah,
you know, taking a look at that, the participant usage and trying to apply it, because human behavior is a big part of what's offered to participants and trying to limit confusion within them.
okay, thank you.
Empower's contract is,
I think 2025, I believe. I can pull that and send it to you tomorrow. And then for the DC plans, we're going to do another fee analysis. This is something that we typically recommend our clients do every year, just to make sure that the fees for the investment options for those plans are reasonable. And then we'd like to bring Capital Group in to review the target date funds, given that they're such a utilized investment option within the plans. And there have been some changes to their team. Callan is generally comfortable, but it's been about 3 years since we've heard from Capital Group. I think it's a good time to have them in. Is there anything that we may have missed that you guys would like to make a priority or add to the work plan?
Should there also be a asset allocation study for the DC plan?
So the DC plan is not really an asset allocation because.
It's all driven by what they select.
Correct. So an investment structure evaluation is really what that takes a deep dive into what those investment options are, not necessarily at the specific managers, but the asset class categories that are offered. So that will certainly be a project that we're going to present to the board this year. And then really that is the design and implementation of a DC plan.
Okay.
I think anything that it's not on here, we'll certainly discover when we do the asset allocation, fixed income structure review.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the big project for the year. You know, we've seen fixed income bounce back at the end of the year, and given where rates are, the outlook going forward it's impactful. And if there's an option to potentially take some risk off the table in the overall asset allocation, a lot of our clients are doing it.
anything with OPEB? Ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I think one thing that actuary is going to present on, they do valuations every other year. So this year they're going to present the OPEB valuation, and depending on the outcome of that, we may do an asset allocation study for the OPEB too. Not necessarily making big changes, but given the funded status increase that we've seen, and now the benefits are being paid from it, we may not need as much equity risk as is in the portfolio now. So based on the valuation from the actuary, I think that'll be a good indicator whether, you know, the current policy is okay as is, or if we should take another look at it. And this is obviously a plan today, but 6 months from now, there could be other priorities that will certainly pivot and make sure that we cover what's needed for the board. And that's all I have for the work plan, unless anyone has any questions.
Go into performance review.
Sure. So I'll pull up, I think it should be on the next tab, the November flash report. Um, So as you might recall, through October, we saw 3 consecutive months of negative equity performance that really reversed in November as we saw economic cooling through slowing job growth, low inflation, and the Fed starting to change its tone on the higher for longer, which, as you may have seen in November and December, really sparked equity markets into positive territory. To give you an idea, US equities are up over 9% in November. They were up 12% in the fourth quarter. Both large and small had positive performance in November, up about 9% each. We have seen growth continue to significantly outperform value. In particular, the quote unquote Magnificent Seven, really driving US equity returns. Global ex-US equities were also positive, also up near 9% and up closer to 10% in the fourth quarter. Again, we saw growth outperform value, but to a slightly lesser degree. Emerging markets up about 8% in November, slightly underperforming the developed markets, but China, really was the laggard within emerging markets. And within fixed income, given the tone of the Fed, we saw the US Ag go up 4.5% in November, and it was up almost 7% in the fourth quarter. We turn ahead to page 3, just showing the asset distribution. Total assets about 482.3 million. We saw about 4 million leave to pay benefits during the month, and about 30.2 million in unrealized investment gains. Frank, I know you weren't here, but at the last meeting, the board voted to raise $10 million from the Russell 1000 Index Fund to pay benefits going forward. So given kind of the strong returns that we saw in that fund in November and again in December, it was the most reasonable place to take the funds from. And I mentioned earlier, you'll see global equity long short about 4.27% versus an 8% target, and that will be a focus of the asset allocation review to reallocate the 4% that was previously with Blackstone. In terms of performance on the next page, I'll highlight a few of the managers. LSV continues to perform very strongly for the plan. See fiscal year to date up over 2% over their benchmark. And, after struggling for quite a few years, their style and process has really come into favor. Principal Dynamic Growth through September, they were largely in line with the benchmark. You can see they've underperformed fiscal year to date, and I do know that they did not have a very good fourth quarter, as we saw really poor valued companies grow significantly, and their process in terms of the growth companies that they look for in the mid-cap universe has really sustained cyclical growth, and we did not see those types of companies outperform in the fourth quarter. So one of those managers that has had portfolio manager changes, and we'd like to have them in at some point in 2024. In international equity, Silchester slightly underperformed the value index, but strongly outperformed the broad EFA index. And you can see they've continued to perform very well over all the time periods. Walter Scott had a good November. They were up almost 11% versus 9.3% for the benchmark. They're slightly ahead year to date, but given when Norwalk invested with the fund in the spring of 23, some of that performance is coming through in the fiscal year to date number. Largely driven by their GARP style, so growth at a reasonable price. They do evaluation sensitivity within their process. And again, a lot of the growth names that we've seen driving returns. Valuations have not been a part of that story. BlackRock Emerging Markets has done nicely. You can see up about 20 basis points fiscal year to date. And ABS has done a reasonable job continuing to produce a positive return, and over the last year up about 6.1%. We turn ahead to the next page. Within fixed income, Prudential Core Bond Fund continues to do well. It's a very conservative fund, and they really outperformed in the rising rate environment. We heard from TCW last month and their longer duration positioning, which had really been a headwind for them for the last 18 months, but they did perform nicely in November, up 5.2% versus 4.5% for the benchmark. Slightly trailing year to date through November, and December was another strong month for the fixed income markets, with returns up 3.5%. And finally, UBS, absolute return manager, so really trying to produce a uncorrelated positive return in any market environment. You can see they've done a really nice job fiscal year to date and over the last year and longer periods as well. So the total fund, slightly positive fiscal year to date, with about 5 months to go, up slightly trailing the benchmark. That's largely due to a bit of a small mid cap overweight within the US equity portfolio, as well as the principal dynamic growth underperformance. But longer term, over the 3 and 5 years, you can see ahead of the discount rate, and over the 7-year period ahead of the benchmark. Any questions on pension performance?
Any questions? Any other discussion, anything? But before I ask for adjournment, I just want to introduce Bob, who is a new member of the board. And if you'd like to just, although we know about you, some don't, so if you could just talk about yourself for a minute.
Sure, I'd love to do that. I first time having this type of an opportunity to serve the city, but it's really exciting for me to branch out into this discipline. I was trained originally as a psychologist, and I worked a lot of years in communications and the entertainment space. I was president of Carsey Warner Television and worked on the domestic syndication of some of the shows you may have heard of, Cosby and Just Judy and things like that. So we have all sorts of inputs in terms of how do we run those businesses. And it's really kind of putting a fine tooth on those types of activities being in this arena. But the last 10 years, I've founded and started creating a company, PassSight Predictive Analytics, and that's data analytics as it defines how people people make decisions and how those decisions impact everything from investments to discipline, everything else. So I'm excited about just doing what I can to help the group. So,
I appreciate that, and you might be able to help those guys in defined contribution. Explain, you can explain. You know, we can get a coach in here.
Now
and
they're doubling up.
double it. Okay, and one other thing, I'd like to thank Jim for taking over for the last two meetings and chair them. As I said, I thought maybe on the agenda, there was gonna be a thing to, you know, select a new chairman, but, that.
Oh, we voted that.
I said-
Unanimously.
No one could figure out why it was on the agenda.
We had an
Anyways.
executive session.
Yeah. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second, all
Second.
in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No, thank you very much.
That was quick. Good night.
Yes,
We have,
I have to be faster than Jim was.
Mission accomplished. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
We have, we have